Well, how serious is this? We know it's retention of national security defense documents and obstruction. How serious is that?
I think this is the most serious charges that he could be potentially facing. And if I were his team, this would be the one that concerns me more than what's going on in Manhattan. The Manhattan case has, in state court there, has numerous problems, legal issues. The fact that they indicted him here means that they believe that they have enough evidence to go forward. The DOJ generally, doesn't move forward unless they believe they have enough. The problem for them is that this is going to be viewed as a political prosecution and in the circles that Donald Trump runs in, a persecution or continued persecution. And for them, from a factual point of view, and obviously we're just hearing this, we don't have the indictment, and we are a long way away from knowing what the actual evidence is. What's been out there so far seems to me to be questionable. And what I mean by that is you have something that really cuts in the way of politics, a political question over whether he should have kept it or not. And now now you've actually charged a former president, a person who's actually running for president again. And it's hard to stay back and look at this, or sit back and look at this and say, is this devoid of politics? That's going to be a tough question for Merrick Garland.
But there's definitely been a former Army, I believe it was a former Army lieutenant colonel, was just sentenced to 3 years, I believe it was, for retention of documents. So if the signature proposition of American law is that no one is above the law, if it happens to a lieutenant colonel, presumably it should also be able to happen, if the facts are proved and so forth, it should be able to happen to a former president.
Look, what you're saying is correct from a purely theoretical point of view, but the charging decisions are never just theoretical. They are practical. And in this case, in this environment, does it make sense for the Department of Justice to charge the former president, the most recent former president, and the person who's running for president again? And on top of this, you have a situation that seemed to be mishandled from the beginning by Merrick Garland. They could have made this a public thing and say, look, Mr. Trump, I'm giving you, or President Trump, and give him his proper accolades as a former president, and say, we're going to give you till this date to return the documents. And then there was the execution of a search warrant. Well, they should have been clear that if you don't do it by this date, we're going to execute a search warrant on your home. They didn't say that.
But I mean,
they didn't say that the FBI is going to go in if you don't do it by this date.
But
that's a problem.
My recollection of the facts of the case is that Mr. Trump or his attorney made representations that he, in fact, had given everything back, and presumably those representations are going to be part of the obstruction case. And I want to ask you about a conspiracy to obstruct, which is to say not just one person and whether you think it might include multiples. But if you make representations that you don't have anything and then you keep something, that's not good. And that's not, I mean, whether you're a former president or not, you can't misrepresent. And in this case, what seems to be the highest level of classification documents, you can't misrepresent that to federal officials.
Well, again, what's been said and what was actually conveyed to his attorney and what his attorney was authorized to say, these are all things that are going to come out. And the other problem that they have is you've learned since then, President Biden had documents in his Delaware home. You've heard that former Vice President Pence had documents in his home. So when you look at all these different things, and you got to say to yourself, is this the wisest course of action for the Department of Justice? And are they going to be able to have a jury that's going to look at the facts and not, whatever side you're on, ultimately, can you prove your case? And part of proving your case is not only whether you have charges that are sufficient to go forward, but whether you can secure a conviction. And I think that will be difficult pretty much everywhere, but in certain places in this country. But I think where they're going to presumably bring this case, or what we understand so far, is if it's in Miami. I mean, that's going to be an interesting locale, and I think they have their job cut out for them to bring the case in Miami.
Speaking of Miami, what do you think we can expect to happen when the former president appears in court on Tuesday?
So, I mean, this is really, really is extraordinary. I mean, he'll have to go in, and he'll be able to go in on his own. He'll get processed, and then it becomes a question whether the United States Marshals, which is the organization that will bring prisoners up into the courtroom, whether they'll give him the courtesy of going up there without being handcuffed. The thing that's different in federal court than in most state courts is that no cameras are allowed in a federal court. That hasn't been approved in any federal court in this country. So you're not going to see cameras, but you'll see sketches. There'll be sketch artists, and he's got to be processed. And so there is an organization called Pretrial Services, which will have to come up with a report and discuss his finances. So, for all those people who are looking at his finances, the different organizations such as whether it's Congress or the District Attorney's Office in Manhattan, he's got to reveal basically everything to Pretrial Service. That will be one of the conditions. And then he'll be released. I can't imagine there would be any sort of bond. Obviously, we know he's not a flight risk and he's not a danger to the community. These are the two standards to determine whether any bail or bond is going to be set in the federal system, and he doesn't meet either standard. So he's going to be released on his own, but he'll have to report to pretrial, which is fascinating for a former president who has obviously got a Secret Service detail.
Right. Vinoo Varghese, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.